So just to kick off, for those of you who don't know, I'm Ruth Waters, the Managing Partner at Young & Partners. We've got a few of us here today from Young & Partners. We have Alan, Craig, Stephen, John and Julie. And welcome to you all. Thanks very much, those of you who've been stalwarts. Ross, you've been a regular at these business surgeries, so thanks for joining us, and welcome if you've not joined us before. Today, we're going to have a quick run through of the regulations. We did that a couple of weeks ago, but some updates to them. So I'm going to do just a very quick run through of them, and also discussion or a brief discussion about the government paper, the Scottish Government paper that was published, kind of much heralded as the exit strategy, but really isn't. It sets out a framework for making decisions as opposed to any decisions themselves being actually made. We're also going to look at asset protection today, and Alan and Stephen are going to run through that. We had a chat about that last week, Ross. There were a couple of issues that you'd brought up, and I think that's a topic that's very relevant for all of us.
Ross made quite an interesting point about a restaurant type client.
Yeah, I thought we could come on.
Doing well beforehand, but wondering what the future might be.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably raises a lot of issues that many businesses will be facing at the moment. We'll have a quick roundup of where we are with support for businesses, some recent announcements, just business grant, small business loans recently announced course of the last couple of days. We'll go through them as well. But first of all, just to have a look at the quick run through of the regulations again. We're now in our week 6 of lockdown. 23rd of March, lockdown was announced, and then the regulations came out on the 26th of March, the Scottish regulations. And just very, very quickly, they divided businesses up into 3. There were 3 parts. There were the restaurants that had to close, those parts that were serving food and drink on the premises. Part 2 businesses were ones that had to cease, so cinemas, concert halls, that type of business. Part 3 were businesses like supermarkets that had to take all reasonable measures to ensure social distancing, so a distance of 2 metres between people was maintained. And we'll all have seen in our daily lives the impact of that and the steps that have been taken by particularly the supermarkets, larger stores, in order to enforce that. Other shops offering goods for sale or hire within the shop were to close, library services and so on, except for they were allowed to provide services online. So that was the regulations, 26th of March. They then were reviewed again on the 16th of April, and the government said that the regulations were to remain in place. They also then issued an Amendment 2 to the regulations, which basically caught all other businesses, which said that all other open businesses had to operate in the same way as supermarkets, making sure that social distancing measures were put in place and maintained. I think most businesses, or all businesses that were open anyway, had to do that by virtue of duties that they would have to their employees and people entering onto premises, but that now actually included it within the regulations themselves. So a lot of difficult issues for businesses to deal with and to look at moving forward. And then following on from that, the Scottish Government published their coronavirus COVID-19 framework for decision making paper, and that was just published on Thursday past there. I don't know if anybody's had a look at the paper in any depth. I mean, it's really short on detail. What it sets out is the framework, as it says, for these decisions, but really in pretty general format. So the aim is for the suppression of the coronavirus, and they're focusing on its reproduction rate, which means basically its spreadability and keeping that to 1 or below 1. The paper looks at the sort of factors that they're going to take into account. So they will look at the wider effect of the regulations, they're going to look at the direct effect of them, health and social care, and then broader aspects of our way of living and our economy, mentioning the 33% shrinking in GDP and looking at the effect on that. And then preparing for transition. So the government's going to look at a managed transition away from the current restrictions, but in such a way that it's going to enable suppression of the virus. So what the government talks about is, again, ongoing physical distancing. They talk about good hygiene, and they talk about hand and cough hygiene. And there's been quite a lot in the press recently, probably we've all been alert to this, of the wearing of masks and what's going to be expected or what might be expected of us in terms of wearing of masks in public places and possibly in the workplace as well. That's we don't really have guidance on that yet, but there will be lots of issues that come out of that. The Scottish Government's also looking at perhaps tailored options to set certain sectors, geographies, parts of the rural economy, those able to work outdoors. But, you know, again, no real answers there. And what the government says is, again, you know, they're going to look at the science on that, and also take sort of public views on it. Measures of surveillance are going to come in as well. That's going to involve quite a huge step forward in terms of technology. Discussion in the press recently about use of apps on phones and so on, and use of surveillance to identify and track the spread of the virus, and also testing, which again, a lot of publicity about that at the moment. I read, I thought it was interesting just actually to quote from it, the government paper. What they say really towards the end of the paper is, to date we've rightly focused the majority of our efforts on protecting as many businesses and jobs as possible through either financial support or to help them repurpose. We're developing guidance for businesses to safely return to operation when the scientific and health advice supports this. So clearly there's a lot of work to be done before we're going to be, or before the government's going to be in a position to change its position on businesses and to give us that guidance. But I mean, I think there will be a lot of considerations for us all. If you're looking at moving back into an office again, what sort of steps are you going to have to take? How are you going to manage the office? You're going to have some sort of COVID-19 policy in place. What's your procedure going to be on face masks? What if an employee refuses to wear a face mask? What are your cleaning requirements going to be? Some very practical, basic issues to consider. Your travel requirements, how you're going to set them up. What are your policies on meetings? So there's lots of issues there. And I think what we'll do next week is look at some of the reshaping of your business and some of the factors that we should all be thinking about and looking at when we're looking at our business moving forward into this transitional phase and then into looking at the future ahead. So a lot really to consider there. I don't know whether anyone's got any thoughts on that. Ross, I was going to ask you just on your business. Are you away, all of you away from the office environment, or do you still have a working office environment of any sort? You're on.
Yeah, everybody's working from home. We just went with the government guidelines straight away because we were getting questions all the time. So, and we've just put something out this morning basically saying that we'll go with the government guidance whenever that is, just to take away any sort of what people are thinking.
Yes, yeah.
I think a lot when we get into this transition phase, given that it doesn't appear that there's going to be any great solution to this problem in the short term. I do wonder whether the governments are probably unlikely to be saying to people, those people who can work from home, who have been working from home, they're unlikely to say, right, all of you can go back again. Presumably they're going to be saying to people for a considerable period, if you can work from home, then continue to do that. I would have thought, would seem logical.
Yeah, I mean, the government paper says that social distancing is going to be here for the foreseeable future. Yeah. Kind of the natural.
So if we've got
on from that would be exactly that.
If we've got serious social distancing requirements for a period of time moving forward, it seems unlikely the government's going to say, well, all of you who've been working from home, you don't need to do that anymore. You can just go back to what you were doing before. It would seem unlikely they're going to do that. I think that's got quite wide-ranging implications for businesses in the medium term.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think in the short term, everybody working from home works. We've all found ways around that as best we can. For some businesses, obviously, it's a lot more difficult. For office-based businesses, probably, with IT, that can be managed. But is that really a medium-term solution for these types of businesses, or are we all going to have to think about how we reshape our businesses to look to a future where perhaps personal meetings will be fewer? We're going to have to manage our contact very carefully with people both within the office environment and out with the office environment as well. There'll be quite a few employee issues too, Julie. You're probably going to be seeing some of them, no doubt, in terms of issues with people and with particular matters. I think it's very difficult to make general statements about that. You really, with employees, always have to look at circumstances at the time, particularly with things like face mask wearing, or indeed people coming into the office. There might be some people who simply say that they're not prepared to come into the office because they're concerned about COVID-19, and there could be some quite difficult issues raised by that.
Presumably health and safety policies as well have to be updated to think about COVID as well, and what's going to be in place for that.
Well, absolutely, they will need to be, and we're going to be governed. I think, Ross, you're absolutely right. We're going to be governed by the government guidance on that and what their requirements are going to be for us. So quite a lot to think about. More perhaps for discussion next week, just looking on what steps we might be taking now to think about our businesses, what we should be looking at, might be property, contracts, people, how we're going to manage this transitional phase, and then moving forward, what's our business going to look like. And so probably that leads us on then to Alan and asset protection. What are we doing now to protect our business, and how do we protect the assets in it?
Was that a cue for me?
That was a cue for you, Alan. The sit back was not not required.
No, absolutely. So I have prepared a comedically short and awful little video just to introduce ourselves to what we want to talk about, and then I was hoping just to have just a general discussion among everyone on actually what we should be doing, because one of the topics that came up last week was, what if we start running out of cash, and what is the ideal amount of cash a business should have? And that prompted, I think, for a lot of us to be thinking, well, actually, sometimes businesses have too much cash. So let me unleash upon you the delights that is my little video. Let us think about the life of Katie. Katie is a little bit glum, not much in her life just now, and Katie thinks, what will cheer me up? So she gets a dog, but she always really wanted a cat. wanted a cat, and then she got a cat, and she was feeling a little bit happier. But sometimes a cat just isn't enough, and what you really need is a vulture. Now, so she got her cat and her vulture and her dog, and she needed to feed them. So she got herself a wee business, and she was working hard in this business, and that allowed her to buy a car. Not much of a car, but she's just starting out. And what next? Well, she really needs somewhere for everyone to live. So she buys herself a wee house. Great. Everything, frankly, is going brilliantly for Katie. Then she meets him. So, it's not all great. Let's not remember that, sometimes bad things happen. But the business is going fantastically. She starts to build up some value in the business. She starts to build up some wealth in that business. She needs to hire someone else. And she's then thinking, well, I wonder if we can expand a bit. So she buys a factory. And she's now got quite a good business and someone working in it, someone else working in it. But how does she protect that business in case something goes wrong? What if the business fails and she can't feed the vulture? So she thinks, do you know what? I am going to set up a limited company. Now, for many businesses, that is the end of the process of Now, for many businesses, that is the end of the life cycle. Katie starts a business as a sole trader. At some point, perhaps influenced by benefits of a limited liability, or perhaps influenced by taxation or whatever it is, Katie decides to wrap up her business assets in a limited company or a limited partnership or something else. And Katie is now happily going to continue to trade that company until perhaps she sells it or decides to wind it up. But we've done enough to protect the vulture and its little friends from the risks of that company trading. But there are other risks here, and the most obvious is that in that trading business, with all of the contracts and other relationships that it has, in that trading business, the wealth that has been built up is exposed. It is exposed to the trading risk of things just going less well than we'd hoped. It's exposed to the unexpected, like coronavirus, for example, or SARS or MERS. It's exposed to a downturn in trade for whatever reason. So if the business gets into trouble, yes, the vulture is safe, but the factory and the other wealth that we built up is then going to be susceptible or at risk of falling into some sort of insolvency. What can we do? Well, I suppose that is the task that we have going forward is, in Katie's business, we've got a factory. Well, why does that trading company need to own the factory? And if it doesn't need to own the factory, what can we do with it? If Katie would be just as well leasing the factory, could we arrange a situation where the business gets the benefit of the wealth that's been built up in the factory, but somehow extracts that and only gets to lease the factory because that's all it needs? Likewise, if there's cash there, does the business need that as working capital? And if it doesn't, is there a way that we can extract that from the business that protects it from potential claim later, but that doesn't incur a huge amount of tax? And if there's anything else, if there is machinery or plant or equipment or stock or whatever it might be, is there something there that we would want to arrange differently? So we know the journey that Katie's been on. We know where she started and we know where she's got to. But imagine she was to start up the business this afternoon and say, right, I've got the possibility of a viable business and I'm going to be employing staff. I've got some wealth. I've got some assets. I've got some premises. Would we really put that all into the limited company on day one? I'm not sure that we would. So the purpose of this is just to encourage some discussion among ourselves of the sort of things that perhaps we have done or would like to do, or we wish we had done in the past, but the sort of things we can do that don't mean that this normal, I've got a limited company that happens to own some stuff, this normal necessarily has to continue. I think one of the things that comes out of coronavirus is that we start looking again at the ways in which we work and operate. And I think the same thing here. If we were to start Katie's business this afternoon, would we really start it with that red box being the limited company and everything within it? What a most fascinating video that was.
It set it out in a very clear way. I think it would warn you of men in top hats, though.
Yes, yes, and I confess that I had an excellent plan to, have our graphic designers produce this as a lovely cartoon, and
you clearly spent a lot of time on that.
But I have spent a staggering amount of time on that. It's so awful given how much time I've actually spent. But the point of it is, I suppose, that I do think that very often the process or the journey of a business comes to a stop a bit earlier than it needs to. Because I don't think you want to spend tons of working capital at the very start, coming up with brilliant wheezes and schemes and professional advice and all of these things. You just start somehow. And at some point, you probably become a limited company or a limited partnership. But it's whether there's a point beyond that we've built up all of this wealth, and are we honestly going to leave it to be at risk? There's a pub near me in Edinburgh, which I don't know how much they spent on it. I would say somewhere between £2.5 and £3 million in making it fantastic. Now, I personally don't like it, but it is fantastic. I'm sure it's exactly what they wanted. And if that's sitting in the limited company that also trades as a pub, then that's at risk. And that just seems to me to be a foolish risk to take with something which has cost them so much money. So that was my starting point. And it's then just thinking, well, what is it we could do? What cunning structure or system could we come up with that allows us to protect the things that we've built up in that business from the normal trading risks? At which point I introduced Mr. Loughrane.
Yeah, I think it's something that we think is very important, particularly in relation to owner-managed businesses, because people work very hard for quite a long period of time, starting a business, then building it up, accumulating assets, perhaps on the understanding that at some point in the future they'll sell out, and that's how they'll realise the wealth. But so often there can be problems en route, which mean that the business can fail. So we think it's quite important to make sure that insofar as is possible, owner managers in particular try to structure things so that assets that they acquire in the business and wealth that they acquire in the business is protected. Some businesses, they have to. I suppose,
Stephen, just to buy in, it's the stuff that you don't need to have in there.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, some businesses need to have a healthy balance sheet. Some businesses don't, and in particular, if you don't, I think you always have to question, well, if there's any risk at all in my business, why do I have any assets within that business, and which are then affected by those risks? If there's a different way of doing it, which would take away the risk from the assets, and our theory really is that you want to try and keep the assets close to you and the debts and the risk as far away as possible. So that would apply to property. So whether you would have a trading business, ideally buying a property that it's going to trade from, or you might think about having it in a different vehicle that's not impacted by anything that happens to that company, because there's trading risk. There's also exceptional risks, like there's some event that happens and there's a liability on the company for that event, or there are other unexpected events like this COVID crisis or the banking crisis before, that people don't actually think are likely to happen to impact their business until they do. So if there are simple solutions to make sure that we look after the assets, the wealth within the business, then we should try to do that at every stage. And with lots of businesses, there are very simple ways that we can go about trying to separate those assets out and protect them. I was talking about property, heritable property. If we've got a property within a trading business that's at risk, if it's in, for example, a self-invested pension, then it's not at risk to the trading business directly. Or if it's in a holding company, or if it's in another company within a group structure that isn't part of the trading business, then the property is not at risk. So that's one solution in relation to a property. But even with movable items like machinery and vehicles, things like intellectual property rights, why are they in the trading business? Why, if we've got value in intellectual property, are we exposing that to the risk of the trading business? Excess cash. Why do we have excess cash in the trading business if we can legitimately remove that cash on a tax neutral basis? So there are all these possibilities to think about with SMEs, owner-managed businesses, that can reduce the risk as far as the business owner is concerned, and can try and make sure that throughout the process, the business owner is creating wealth and creating assets that they get to retain, rather than potentially losing due to some event that impacts the trading company.
I think that the key is, or must be, I know that you and Alan largely speak with a lot of businesses about this, but the key must be actively taking decisions, looking at why you're doing what you're doing, and whether you should be doing it better. I'm thinking about some construction companies where, for them, for tender purposes, their balance sheet may need to be of a certain size.
And that might be the answer to the question. It might be as simple as, we couldn't do that because the state of the balance sheet is important in terms of tendering. And if that is the case, then there may be some things that could be done, or it may be that nothing could be done. But at least you've asked the question, and someone's considered whether that's worthwhile exploring or not. I think the big failure is not identifying the question. Because construction is one thing, but construction also is such a risky area that if there are things that can be done, then it's certainly worthwhile looking at it, because you just never know in terms of claims that can hit construction companies, subcontractors, claims that may in fact be spurious, but it costs so much money to resolve that they could have a fatal impact on the business, or non-payment.
Yeah, but the other side, I know it tends to be construction companies or companies that are entering into some competitive tender process tend to be the ones we think it's hard to do this. And I think that there is a hardness there. It is difficult. But that doesn't mean that we should leave everything in that trading company.
No, exactly.
And if there's an opportunity to be taking out particular assets or to be isolating particular risks, then on my, those people who've had the pain of spending time with me, deliberate is my word of the month. And if we've taken a deliberate decision to expose some assets, that's fine. But if we have not taken a deliberate decision, and like Katie, we've got everything in one limited company, and I can think of lots of businesses like that, then we're leaving open to challenge something that we could easily get out.
Well, the example I mentioned that Ross had talked about a restaurant type business last week. That example is quite a good example. You've got a business that's trading very well, no problems anticipated. Now, if that business owns the property, for example, or if it is the tenant under the lease and that lease has value, or if it owns expensive equipment within the premises, if it owns movable items that have value in there, if it's got cash in that business, then all of these things are exposed at the point when an exceptional event like this COVID crisis comes along, whereas a structure whereby those assets are not all within the trading business could avoid the situation where all the assets are potentially at risk.
Now, there are other reasons why this sometimes might seem hard. I mean, one of the rules for the Law Society is, as a law firm, if we're going to be a company, only lawyers, so only Scottish lawyers or registered European lawyers, be directors and chairmen of that company. So you think, oh, well, actually, we wouldn't be able to do that. You know, we wouldn't be able to have any separate entity. Well, no, we could just have an entirely separate entity, which is also a law firm, but which never trades. So even when there are barriers to do that, and it starts to become a bit of a nuisance, I just look back to the period from late 2008-9 until maybe 2013, where I seem to spend all of my time saying to people, I know that you were tremendously successful, and I know that we've worked really, really hard to rescue something from your business, and what I've got for you is this pen, and that's all you get out of it.
Yeah.
And I know that was your life's work, but you should be happy that I've got you the pen, because you weren't going to get that otherwise. And it was soul destroying for the thick end of 5 years to be saying to people, you've lost everything because there weren't plans put in place early enough. And let us learn from that. You know, we've known this for a long time, that actually there are ways to structure a business, or there are ways to structure the way we run a business. That means that it's not just the pain you get when COVID hits.
No, I think that's right. And I think we have an awful lot of clients who, particularly in the manufacturing sector, who work within the business for many, many years. I can think of small engineering companies, for example, where they don't have a great deal, but they perhaps have a building, a couple of buildings, and they've got some fairly expensive machinery. And very often, without looking at it and actually planning it, very often all of those assets will end up within the trading company. And it's quite heartbreaking when you see a situation where people have worked for 30 years and suddenly something exceptional happens and they find that the business is trading badly, and all of those assets that they've invested in over a long period of time suddenly end up at risk. Whereas if we had structured it slightly differently, that needn't have been the case.
And I think it's understandable how people find themselves in that situation, because Alan, as you say, often the business starts off with an idea or something that you're making, and life takes over, the business takes over, the practical day-to-day running of it takes over, and you maybe not have the sort of support infrastructure in place to support the levels of turnover that you then start achieving. So it might be support in terms of people, or support in terms of your IT, for example, your contractual support, legal support, accountancy support, whatever other support it is that you're needing. And looking at structure perhaps is the last thing that you do, but I guess what you're saying is really it should be the first thing that you're doing, and particularly at the moment, time is perhaps key.
Yeah, I think that's what prompted this to actually be sharing this in this forum is, you know, we were talking last week about, you know, when money is getting tight, and you know, the counterpoint to that is, well, maybe you've actually got too much money and we should be squirreling that away. But you know, when you're building up a business, that's what you should be doing. But there's always going to be a trigger point of something, and it will be the first time the bookkeeper can't deal with the particular issue that you've got, and you move from just dealing with bookkeepers to going to someone like Ross, who's actually, you know, a proper accountant and tax advisor. And so you get that trigger to say, do you know what? The way I was always doing things, that wasn't the right thing. You know, it was fine back then, but it's not good enough anymore, because I now need a serious person to be dealing with my tax affairs. Or I was happy dealing with the local solicitor, but I now need a business lawyer to talk to. Or I was happy with the bank manager, but I now need to speak to a serious person who can fund me. It's at that trigger point we just need to be thinking, and what else?
And I think the thing with structure is, though, your structure works until it doesn't. So what you don't want to do is to be looking at this after you've had that trigger point, and you may not be able to do something about it.
But there's always going to be something which is going to prompt you. No one should be sitting thinking, you know, okay, excellent glass of wine, enjoyed my tea. Do you know what? I need to create a limited company. That should not be how you spend your time. But sometimes there'll just be that thing that says, I realise now that what I was doing before wasn't right because, for example, I've had to go to a better firm of accountants. At that point, you should be stepping back and saying, what else is it that I should be thinking about? And it's hard to do that because, you know, you've got a business to run, you've got a family to wrangle. Apparently, coronavirus is going to, you know, sweep the earth. It's quite hard to spend, you know, to spare some emotional or intellectual time on that. But I think, especially just now, especially for businesses that are in the lucky position where they've got some cash there, they've got some assets there, that things are still looking fine, I think we should be thinking hard about, well, should we not structure this a wee bit better for you?
And I suppose particularly at the moment where you've got so much uncertainty.
Sorry,
Ross.
Yeah, we had exactly what Stephen and Alan are talking about. We had a client, and you did talk about a trigger point. He is in the construction, but he's got it's big heavy machinery, and his business had the machinery in it. He had a lot of cash in it, and he got a trigger point where somebody threatened him with something that went wrong on one of the jobs. And he had a few sleepless nights, and he came to us and said, well, what can I do with this? And we've done exactly what you're talking about. We set up a limited company, which is a plant hire company, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And he now sold the plant to his other company, and he got the cash out by paying back money from the cash and leasing it over. And he's now got, over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years, he's maybe got £500,000 in the plant hire company and all the plant.
And no risk from the trading.
Yeah. So he trades through the existing company, and that's, I mean, the biggest problem is he does quite well, but there was a balancing point of what his accounts had to look like because of the people who he was working for.
Yeah.
So that has to be borne in mind. The other thing you might need to bear in mind is if you set up another company, is that if you're registered with the council or somebody to do work, that company is the legal entity that's registered under that you can't just sort of switch it and think, oh, I'm still going to get the tender documents and that type of thing through.
No, I mean, it has to fit with everything else you're doing. You know, if we think about construction as the example, you know, it might be a really long road to get gross payment status for CIS. You know, this is not my field at all, much more, I'm sure, your field and Ruth's field. But, you know, that, you know, we might be stuck with, well, that's the only entity we can use for that. But as you say, we don't have to do absolutely everything through it. We can carve a wee bitty out. Now, I used to say piggy banking, and Lockery would be saying wealth, and I've come round to the idea of wealth. It's coming up with some way of isolating the wealth that we've built up in a way that isn't a tax disaster and leaves the money available to be put in as working capital as needs be, but isn't just having it all exposed to risk. Some of it has to be exposed to risk because you're in business. You know, that's the whole, you know, that's that, you know, I have recently, 2 years ago, taken up golf, which is excruciating on many levels. But
yes, it is.
It certainly is, especially hearing me talk about it. But, so I joined the Murrayfield Golf Club, and I'm hearing a lot of griping from people about why am I paying my subs when the course is closed? Well, it's very simple. You're a member of the bloody club. You know, that's part of the deal, but it's a part of the deal with being in business. There is some risk, but I just don't think it all has to be a risk. Anyway, I bleated on about this for 20 minutes. So, delighted if anyone, you know, whether it's anyone who's watching live or anyone who's watching on YouTube, delighted to speak about these issues because it's not hard. And as you say, Ross, it's something that you can do comparatively simply. And it might well be the start to, you know, a parallel, you know, this guy you're speaking about, Ross, you know, he's got a trading business that he might one day be selling. But he's also now got a lovely plant hire business. Okay, well, who doesn't want to have choices? So,
and Ross, I was going to ask you, are you seeing with COVID currently, are you getting clients coming to you with these sort of issues and looking for advice?
Yeah, it's been strange the last week or so. A few conversations with clients where, for exactly what I said last week, I had another discussion with somebody in decent business and it's just been switched off. And I said, are you going to the bank? And he said, well, actually, we don't know what we'd ask for, and we don't know if a bank loan's actually going to help, because they might actually be in the circumstances where they could open, but actually they couldn't sell any of their stock to because they sell to tourist shops and that type of thing. So they're actually sitting there going, we don't actually know what to do. So they might have to reduce the business or change the business to a different entity. So these conversations, I think at the moment, I think a lot of people are just saying, I need to get through. But once the furlough stops, I think a lot of them is going to be hard decisions.
And I think the important thing is that if they're considering these potential issues, I think the sooner they start planning for how they're going to deal with them, the better. Because obviously, if you can set up something different before the point where you actually need to, you always have more options.
Yeah, almost exponentially more options. If things are going well, can come up with 10 great schemes. If you're at the point of I'm starting to run out of money, we've gone from 10 to maybe 2 or 1, and the 1 or 2 aren't that great.
Yeah.
Whereas of the 10, 7 of them were fantastic.
I mean, I think at almost any stage, it's worth looking at what the options might be, because usually we can come up with something, even if it's something which still carries a fair degree of risk. But certainly, the earlier you can start to address these and come up with some potentially alternative structure, the better. Certainly, if you can do it before you're actually in the situation where you need to do it.
I think there's so much uncertainty over time, and I think that's the big thing for a lot of, especially hospitality. We'll get pubs and restaurants saying to us, if it is going to be November, then that's not going to work. And if they're going to stop the furlough at the end of June, that's definitely not going to work. So I think there's all the uncertainty of the timing and what's going to happen with that type of thing. I suppose travel as well. If people are saying you're not allowed to travel into Scotland, and the tourist industry are basically saying, well, we don't know how long we can see this out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And the messages that are coming from the government are certainly very, very cautious in terms of easing of restrictions and how that's going to play out.
I didn't read anything more than the headline in the Times this morning, but it was saying about the potential extension of furlough just in particular sectors. I mean, I'm presuming that is hospitality they're talking about. I don't even know though, Ross, that actually helps.
It would in the pubs.
Yeah.
So the pubs and restaurants, I think that the carrying on of the furlough would help. But at that restaurant I was talking about, I've had discussions with them again since last week, and they're basically saying, look, if they say to us it's November, then we will just try and wing this up as best as we can, and then park it and see if we can start next year. They're in the lucky bit that the owners actually own the property, so they've got choices. But I think for a lot of places in Edinburgh, that's not going to be, or everywhere, that's not going to be the choice unless you've only got 2 or 3 staff, and you can see this out. If you've got any number of staff, there's no way that they're going to throw their own money into it, and quite rightly so.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Well, exactly. I wouldn't invest in it. So why should someone who already owns it invest in it? Okay. One of the points that came up last week, Ruth, was the travelling point. I'm just thinking, moving away from business structures and so on. I know that we've seen quite a few more letters this week from overzealous, shall we say, legislators, MSPs.
Interested people.
Yeah, people who've got far too much time in their hands, functionally complaining about businesses being open. And when we look at the new the new regulations, my take on it is, unless you're specifically obliged to close, then you're allowed to be open, and that is almost the end of it.
Have you seen any of these, Ross? Any of these letters? There's a few MPs are throwing these letters out like confetti. We're seeing them with manufacturing clients, getting letters telling them they've got to shut down, and they're demanding for evidence of what they're doing for protecting their employees and all sorts of nonsense. You got any clients?
Not seen anything.
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real there's a real mixed message out there on that, because there's also guidance that came out from the UK government that said, you know, that they specifically hadn't legislated for businesses to close, that businesses should remain open, and that the economy was crucial. And yet, on the other side, there are interventions that are taking place, you know, and letters coming out where businesses are properly trying to operate. And for some, it must be very, very difficult, because they simply can't have workers at home. They have to have factory premises or operating premises.
But these MPs seem to be under a mistaken impression that the issue is, are you doing essential work? They seem to think that's actually the question for these manufacturing companies, not can your employees work from home?
And that's not what the regulations say. The regulations are really quite simple in their format, actually, in terms of what they set out. But the guidance from the UK government and from the Scottish government has been different, and in particular in relation to construction, for example, it was quite a different message that came out north and south of the border, and very difficult for businesses to operate. So many of them have got sites in south of Scotland and sites in the north of England, and you know, for them trying to run their businesses, it's very difficult for them to know how to do that. But a real mixed message that's coming out. But I think it will get more difficult, actually, because the regulations of themselves are relatively straightforward. When you then think about more people going back to work, there are going to be more issues amongst employees within businesses themselves, business to business, as to how people are operating and different ways of operating. And I hope that the government comes out with some very clear guidance on what's expected.
But come back to what someone said a moment ago, which is, you know, at the end of the furlough period, I think that will actually be an important point, because at that point, it's, you know, you've got employees who are having to still come into work and be exposed to risk, and you've got employees who are sitting in the garden, you know, enjoying a whale of a time on 80% of their pay. I think when that's no longer an option, then this as a pressure, I think, is going to slightly ease, because there's no way at all the MSPs or MPs are doing this because they feel they should. They're doing it because constituents are complaining, but they have to go to work and their mate doesn't.
Yeah, probably.
I think, though, let's assume that end of June is when this is going to come to an end. I think at that point it's going to be easier. You know, I can think of a number of different people that I've spoken to in the last week or 10 days about this, where essentially the employees are taking the view, I should be furloughed. You know, the starting point is, you must have an excellent reason for not furloughing me. And no, the starting point is, if you want to be paid, you have to come into work.
Yeah.
And if, you know, if there's a business you're open and you're not obliged to be closed, then the employees should be coming in too. And I think there's a mindset issue that I hope will change in brain hurting how long it is, you know, eight weeks until the end of the furlough system, that people aren't expected, you know, I'd be delighted to be doing nothing, but, you know, that does not put butter on the parsnips.
Well, of course, the regulations set out clearly as well the social distancing requirements, and the fact that you must stay at home. It's a criminal offence if you're out of your home, but there is a defence to it, and one of the defences is travel for purposes of work, where it's not reasonably possible for you to work from home. So, you know, that's where it comes into play with the businesses and the operation of businesses and how they're running.
I feel for the folk who are having to go into work. I mean, as Ruth knows, I have a slight obsession with going to B&Q and buying myself things that I urgently don't need. But I wouldn't want to have to do their job, you know, but, you know, they want to get paid, presumably. Anyway, I'm going to get off that high horse. But the message, from my point, the big point is, unless you're obliged to be closed, you're allowed to be open.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the test. The test isn't, you know, that you're doing essential work. Although the clients, astonishingly enough, the clients who we have had complaints about being open are actually doing really essential stuff.
Yeah, but it's besides the point.
But yeah, exactly. But that's irrelevant, because actually what matters is, but we're not one of the ones who are told to be closed. If you'd said we all have to close, you should have said that. But
Yeah.
that's not what your rules are.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm having quite a ranting day today. I don't really know why.
Okay, well, that was useful to have that discussion. I think looking ahead to next week, we're looking at shaping of businesses and how we get into this transitional phase and these factors that we should be considering. A quick roundup just on any changes in finance. Yesterday, or 27th of April, the small business loan was announced, 100% state backed, worth up to 50 grand or 25% of turnover, and it lasts for 6 years. The Scottish Government also on the 15th announced 220 million in grants. So 120 million of that was the Small Business Grant Scheme, 100% grant to the first property, 75% grant on secondary and other properties, and also they've made available 100 million to the recently self-employed, and applications can go in by the 5th of May on that, or open on the 5th of May. I think the fund actually opens at the end of April. So some further announcements on funding there in the form of grant and loans. I think we're all pretty familiar now with the furlough scheme for both employees, self-employed, delayed VAT payments, delayed self-assessment, and the CBILS scheme. Ross, have you got anything to add to any of the funding grant schemes?
No, I think the furlough claims are coming through quite quick. Ones we put in on Thursday are getting paid out today, which is less than 6 days. So, and the ones that went on Monday last week got paid on Monday this week. So it seems to all be working.
How did you go on with the particular one? You mentioned one where there was a business that people redundant.
We got it through.
Well done.
It's maybe not. The glitch is still there on the computer, but we had to get it through so that he could pay his employees tomorrow, and he got that this morning. So
good news. That's good.
He's quite happy with that. There's still a small glitch if you've got owner-managed companies who pay an annual salary, and it's paid on the 31st of March. They will tell you that you don't have a pay in 1920. There's pressure on the government to release that, because that again is affecting the wee owner-managed business who's only got himself and just doing an annual salary. So if you got paid if you RTI'd it on the 15th of March, you'd be fine. If you RTI'd it after the 19th of March, you don't get it. So there's a few that are just knocking it back for the computer says no again, but I think the government are getting asked to look at that as we speak. It's quite a small one, but it is affecting a lot of people who are not getting claims anywhere else.
Right.
Well, but that's the thing, isn't it? You know, as you look at the shape of the pyramid, although it's a small claim, there's a vast number of people in that slice.
Yeah.
You know, there aren't many people at the very, very tip, but they're big folk. But yeah, the people who are paying themselves an annual salary of 10 grand, you know, that's, you know, a quarter of the businesses or something.
Yeah, but they seem to be, the furlough scheme, they seem to be turning the payments around pretty quickly and seeing that coming in for businesses' cash flow. Okay, well, unless anyone's got anything else that they want to add to that, thanks very much, and hopefully see you next week as well when we look at our next roundup. Thanks everyone for your contributions.